thank you for joining us.
Hello, everyone. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you very much. For the benefit of our listeners, our fans, we have with us tonight our guest, Mr. Tom Moffat, who's the Chief Executive from the World Cricketers Association. Tom is a former first-class cricketer, having played for South Australia in the 2010-2011 season. Tom has worked as a commercial lawyer following his admission in Australia, and he has also worked briefly as a seconded lawyer to the Australian Cricketers Association and the United Nations International Criminal Tribunal for the Yugoslavia in The Hague in 2013. Prior to joining the World Cricketers Association, Tom was legal counsel at Professional Footballers Australia, the collective representative of Australia's professional footballers. Once again, good evening to you, Tom. Thank you for joining us, and we will turn the mic over to Brother Dale.
Yes, welcome, Mr. Moffat, and how are you, sir?
I'm going well, thank you, everyone, and thank you for the kind introduction. It's great to be here with you.
Yes, and it's an honor for us here to have someone of your standing in world cricket, gracing us with your presence, sir. And we don't take it lightly. Now,
no problem at all. Great to be here.
Yes. Okay. So what we'll do is just get a little something going, as we would say. As you can see, we're mostly West Indians here. So we'll be looking at it from a global point of view with a West Indian perspective, if that makes sense to you. And
sure.
I know that you played for South Australia, and there is a West Indian that has a particular South Australian record in the Shield. And it's a record that I'm extremely proud of, so I can imagine how South Australians embrace him and what they think of him. And I speak of none other than the greatest cricketer of all times, Sir Garfield St. Auburn Sobers, and his all-round display in the early 60s. Are you aware of that, and what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely, I am. There's some great links between the West Indies and South Australian cricket, and look, my career was very brief, but I'm well aware of the heritage and the history over here. And look, the other touch point for me was who'll be familiar to you guys is obviously Carl Hooper is based in South Australia, and he was coaching in the South Australian system when I was in there. He was coaching the second 11 team. So I played a little bit under Carl and got to know him quite well. And so yeah, look, the links between the West Indies region and South Australia are strong and ongoing.
Yes, thank you very much. And there is someone in your organization who is or was one of my favorite players. And I'm speaking of none other than your president, Lisa Shalekar. And just a couple sentences about her, because I think her life is truly fascinating.
Yeah, Lisa's story is a fantastic one. She was originally from India and ended up coming out to Australia with parents who adopted her, and she obviously forged a fantastic career as a player, captaining Australia to several World Cup wins in the women's game, and has gone on to be a fantastic broadcaster as well. And we're incredibly lucky to have her as the president of WCA. She does great work for us, and she's very actively involved in our business and in the work that we do. So look, she's a great character for our sport, and we're really lucky to have her.
Thank you, sir. Now we'll get some serious West Indian typical back in the past fast bowling at you now, if you don't mind. So helmet or no helmet, it's coming at you.
Bring it on. Look forward to it.
Okay, how feasible is it to have a fully centralized global cricket calendar across formats, and what are the main challenges in coordinating such a calendar?
Sure. Look, our sport, it's a global sport, as you all know. We've got three core formats of the game. We've got international cricket, and we've got the domestic leagues. There are lots of competing interests in our sport, and if you look around the top table of the sport and the leadership of it at ICC level, there are pretty much every geopolitical dynamic on the planet is represented in our sport. So by its very nature, it's clearly very challenging to bring the sport together into a really clear and coherent calendar in terms of how cricket is scheduled, and in particular between all the international cricket formats and domestic leagues. So there's no doubt it's challenging to do that. But our view is that it's absolutely critical that cricket continues to work really hard to try and develop a more coherent calendar. We think a lot of the issues in the game stem from the fact that there really isn't a particularly well organized and centralized calendar, and one that can lay out a nice, neat, linear calendar and narrative to follow across the year in both international cricket and the domestic league. So we think it's one of the biggest challenges that the game needs to grapple with and come together and develop that. And we're really keen on behalf of the players to play a role in contributing to that process as well.
Okay, thank you. And was there any consideration about the player burnout in coming forth with this proposal?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, we developed a report last year. It was released earlier this year. Sorry, it was built on the back of feedback from players, from a number of different stakeholders across the sport, as well as players. And really what the report looked at was what are the ways in which we can bring the schedule together and do so in a way that means we protect international cricket, and international cricket can still thrive into the future, but we also enable where the game is going in many respects is linked to the domestic leagues landscape, and we also enable that as well. And clearly the players are the common thread across both of those landscapes. The best players in the world are in demand in domestic leagues and in international cricket. So the question of burnout is definitely one that we're very conscious of, and one that players and other stakeholders raise with us consistently. So in any calendar and schedule that's developed, that's got to be a part of it, is looking at realistically what are the players able to do, and what can't they do, and what's taking it too far. So absolutely player welfare and burnout and workload should be a consideration within the whole system and how it hangs together. At the moment, we've basically got a system that has very few rules at global level, and we've got a full calendar of international cricket basically overlaid on a full calendar of domestic leagues, and that makes it incredibly difficult for most people in the game to make sense of what's going on at a particular time, and for players from a workload perspective as well to manage their workloads and also optimize their careers and their earning potential, which all of us do in our careers, and obviously the players want to do that at the same time as well.
Okay, so the World Cricketers Association, they have called for a capping of the share of global revenues with a minimum and maximum. What are the possible impact to the commercial aspect of the game if this is implemented?
Yeah, so part of the recommendations in the report looked at the economics of the game and how revenue is shared in the game at the moment. And we did quite a lot of research. We had consultants alongside us helping us with that research to look at where the money is going at the moment. And what we know from that is more than 80% of the money in the game sits within three countries, Australia, England, and India. And a lot of that is because those countries they bring a lot of value to the table. There's lots of eyeballs generated from those regions, and they're commercially very successful cricket regions. The point of view that our report takes is that in order to have a competitive, strong international cricket product, you need to enable more than just a couple of countries to be able to invest in the game, invest in talent in their environments, invest in high performance environments and players, and so on and so forth. So one of the tools that cricket can use to be able to do that and to spread wealth a little bit more evenly than perhaps it currently is through the ICC distribution model, whereby all the money that comes into the ICC through broadcasts and other revenue streams for World Cups, that then gets distributed back out to the different countries and the governing bodies in the different countries. So what our report argues is that that's one lever that the game could use to even up how money is shared and enable more countries to invest more deeply in the game. And there are a number of other levers that the game can use as well to just make sure that money is shared a little bit more equally. So we're never going to have a perfect world in cricket, as I mentioned up front. You know, we've got it's an international game, and there's lots of different countries with very different views on things. So we're never going to have a perfect setup, but we think the game does need to move closer to a system that shares revenue a little bit better to enable more countries to invest in cricket in their countries.
Okay, thank you. So a little bit beyond revenue sharing, I know you have highlighted systematic issues such as non-payment or delayed payment in some leagues. And you are recommended measures such as escrow accounts, etc., to help or to implement penalties for boards that sanction those leagues. How receptive have governing bodies been to these proposals so far, from whatever feedback you have received?
So it is a huge issue in our sport, and we know that our survey data, we survey the players around the world every year, and I think at the moment, sort of high 20% of players have experienced late payment when they go and play in a domestic league or cricket event, or non-payment. Some of them don't end up getting paid at all, even compared to what's in the contracts that they may have signed. So our report looks at that issue and it highlights that there are actually some very simple solutions to that. If the sport was able to come together and regulate those issues properly to protect the players, in a much clearer way. So, look, the answer to your question is that the game hasn't solved that problem yet. And one of the reasons for that is the way our game is structured at the moment means that every country pretty much looks after its own environment, and no one there's an inability for the countries to come together and set up regulations at global level that could be rolled out on a global scale to help protect the players and others from issues like that. So that's one that we'll continue to advocate for, because we think there are some very simple things that the game can do to create a much better environment and a much more straightforward environment for the players, and to protect the sanctity of contract. And we'll keep beating that drum.
Now, obviously, there are conflicts mainly between some boards and their players as far as availability is concerned. How can we look forward to the World Cricketers Association to help to resolve that problem?
So look, ultimately around the world, a number of player groups around the world, including in the West Indies, the players have their own domestic players association. It's the same in Australia or in England or South Africa, and so on and so forth. And usually domestic issues in those countries are dealt with by the Domestic Players Association, and they will negotiate player contracts or collective bargaining agreements in those environments. where there is no players association, which is some cricket playing countries, often the players will come to us as WCA and ask for our help on certain things, or ask, what's fair, what do you think, what do you think is fair, and we will always try and assist those player groups where we can. But ultimately, each player group in their own environment, it's really important that they get organised, because we know that players in countries with players associations have much better terms and conditions and have much better ability to have a voice in the game than the players in countries where there is no players association. So that's a big part of our role, is to help those dynamics. We will always try and help the game as well. We and the players around the world have an interest in the game being healthy and successful. So it's not just about fighting over money and contracts and things like that. We actually want to contribute to the game. And we will always come at it from that lens as well, because, as I said, the players ultimately have an interest in the health and success of our sport as well, because they benefit from a healthy sport.
Okay, is it a hindrance? Because I noticed that on your board, for example, Wavell Hines, the president of, we call it WIPA, West Indies Professional Cricketers Association, he's on the board. And we noticed that Jason Holder and Haley Matthews are player representatives. But I noticed that there are players from one of the main countries that don't have any representation on your board. I don't know if you care to speak on that or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there are some countries who are not represented by a players association or at WCA level, and we think that's a real shame for them and for the whole sport, because ultimately, as I said before, we think it's a really healthy thing for any sport, for the players to be represented and to have a voice and to have a say in the environment and the game that impacts them. So look, there are a couple of pretty significant countries who are not a part of WCA, India, the Indian players being one of those, and a couple of others around the world. But at the moment, we represent the players from 16 of the top 20 cricket playing countries collectively. So look, the vast majority are already organised or are getting organised. And look, we know that in some parts of the world, the players have faced opposition to being part of a players association or to being affiliated to us. And that's, as I said before, that's a real shame, because we think it's a healthy, normal part of any high functioning sport. If you look at most of the successful team sports in the world, most of them have really high functioning players associations, and the players have a voice and a say in shaping their sport. And that's been a positive to the way the whole sport hangs together in different sports, and cricket's no different. So look, our door's always open to players who want to be affiliated to us or who want assistance in their own environments. And as it becomes normalized in those last few countries where the players aren't currently represented, we will absolutely be there to assist.
Okay, so how effective is the current ICC structure in representing all member nations equally?
Very good question. I think if you read our report, we do address the leadership question, and we deliberately steered away from it originally when we set out to do the report. We steered away from that question to start with, because often when you talk about governance or leadership previously, it becomes very political very quickly, because people are often very wedded to the structures that exist at the moment or that have previously existed. But the reality is our sport is set up as it's a federated model, which means Cricket West Indies go to the ICC table, Cricket South Africa go to the ICC table, so on and so forth. And the issue historically with that model is that often countries will go to that global table at the ICC and will often be there representing their own interests or the interests of their stakeholders back home. And what that means is, in effect, if the ICC is operating that way as a members organization, is that it's not necessarily looking out for the interests of the game as a whole, as a global whole. So our report talks to that, and the reason it talks to that is because pretty much everyone we spoke to, I think we spoke to 60 odd stakeholders across the game, and the list of names is very impressive. Almost all of them, to a person, raised the leadership issue as one that's really important for our sport to address. So look, the current model is by default, it's not perfect. It's what we've got at the moment, but we really want to encourage decision makers, particularly when they sit around that ICC table, to be looking out for the interests of the sport as a whole. And that includes the not just the big countries, but also the mid-sized countries and the West Indies of the world, and the smaller countries and the Netherlands and the USs of the world also, because they're all critical to the game's future, and we need more strong countries to have a good competitive product that fans want to watch, players want to play, and broadcasters and commercial partners want to pay for.
Okay, and you mentioned in the report the Global Growth and Development Fund. If that is established, how would your association go about ensuring fairness and accountability in that regard?
So that recommendation really went to ensuring that there's money distributed to a deeper group of countries, specifically to fund international cricket and a base level of international cricket, because we know in countries like the West Indies or in regions like the West Indies, it's really challenging to and it's quite expensive to put on cricket events. And we think that the more, at least a base level of international cricket is subsidized and can be paid for centrally, in the same way that a lot of ICC events are, we think that's ultimately going to enable the international game to survive and thrive in more parts of the world. So the key to that being implemented and effective would be there would need to be an ability for that to be centrally managed at global level, ideally by the ICC, and for that to be properly regulated and established, and there to be transparency on how that money is distributed and used. But the principle there is to help to fund international cricket and a base level of international cricket in more countries, because we want international cricket to survive and thrive into the future.
Okay. And what lessons could the ICC/cricket learn from soccer with FIFA, or even basketball, baseball in the United States in regulating the sport?
I think it's a great question, and we did speak to a number of other sports as part of this process and as part of the report process, and we did that particularly in the context of how they've set up their calendars and their international calendars. I think football is a really good example of, it's the biggest sport in the world. It has historically had similar issues to what we have in cricket. It's got a thriving club game and a domestic club game, and also the international side of the sport as well. And the way that they have managed their calendar in a way that those two things can coexist alongside each other is by establishing international windows. So periods of time throughout the calendar where international cricket is the focus, international football is the focus, and players, if they're available, are required to play in it. And they've been able to differentiate the two and protect the international game, but also enable enough free time in the calendar for the leagues as well. So there's precedent for the windows concept in other sports and in the biggest sport in the world. And we looked at a number of other sports also and how they've done it. And look, there really is, in our process, we certainly didn't find any other credible solution to setting up a system where domestic cricket can sit alongside international cricket. There was really no other credible solution that any other sports come up with to enable that balance and for them to coexist. So we can definitely learn a lot from other sports, we think, and we think cricket should be doing that because, look, we do some things really well in our sport, but there are some things that we don't do particularly well, and we should be looking to best practice around the world as to how we can change that.
Yes, and I thank you very much, Tom, for the clarity with which you have answered the questions. And I'm going to turn you over to the rest of the panelists. And just before I do that, though, I want you to be aware that the world's first Cricket Hall of Fame, many, or if not all of us, are in some way connected to it, either as inductees or awardees or work with them in some way. And we have been around since 1981. So when your organization came together to form a Cricket Hall of Fame, you were about 25 years behind us in the United States. And that is something we are extremely proud of, you know, and I know that you have merged that Hall of Fame with the ICC's Hall of Fame, and Cricket Australia also has its own Hall of Fame. But just to let you know, you are in the home of the Hall of Fame, the trailblazers for it.
Brilliant. Well, I didn't know that, but look, that's fantastic, and I'd love to talk more about that offline as well. That sounds great.
Okay, thank you very much. Sir Dennis, over to you.
All right, thank you, Brother Dale, and of course, Tom. Tom, the WCA has indicated in a report that the future of international cricket is at risk. Can you perhaps share with us what factors went into that conclusion?
Probably the biggest couple of factors we looked at there are, firstly, where is money coming into the game? In which landscapes is money coming into the game from? And we looked at the economics of the sport, and what we found there was a pretty clear trend that increasingly the new investment in our sport is coming into the domestic leagues landscape. A lot of that is carried by the IPL, which is an asterisk on that, but increasingly that's the case. It's also coming into the sport through ICC events. The landscape that's probably most in decline as a percentage of overall share of money coming to the game is traditional bilateral international cricket. So firstly, we looked at the numbers. Secondly, we looked at players in particular and what they're thinking and what they're doing. And the survey data that we have from players, and anecdotally, we speak to players around the world, including the top players every day. And we know an increasing number of them are saying, they're telling us and they're telling the game that they will increasingly look at rejecting international contracts and central national contracts to go and play in domestic leagues also. So they're probably the two most prominent factors in that position that you read out there, which is that international cricket we think is under real threat. And beyond that, look, we really want to make sure that, as I said up front, that we've got a system in which they can coexist alongside each other. We don't think the system as it is at the moment and as it's designed at the moment, if it's one-way traffic away from international cricket towards the leagues, we don't think that's ultimately a healthy thing for the sport and for that balance in the long run.
So the ICC, my apologies, the ICC, do they actually, the leaders on the ICC, do they actually accept or see the points that your organization has been trying to put in front of them?
I think there's an acknowledgement of some of the issues that we've raised, and I think we presented this report at Lord's at a conference called World Cricket Connects earlier in the year as well, and at the same time, the Boston Consulting Group presented a very similar report to that room at Lord's, highlighting very similar issues. And I think in that room, at least, which contained most of the important decision makers in our sport, there was a pretty good acknowledgement of a lot of the issues here. the hard part is coming up with solutions, and coming up with solutions that people are willing to implement, because implementing solutions here to the problems that have been highlighted requires people to sometimes cede control on certain things, and we know historically, as I said up front, that often people at the global tables of our sport haven't been willing to do that, because everyone's, as I said, looking out for their own interests often, and the interests of their stakeholders back home, not necessarily the thing as a whole.
Thank you. There is a report circulating that the committee of the ICC has decided not to engage with the World Cricketers Association over players' naming and image rights in mobile gaming. What is the WCA response to this dismissal of your membership's concerns?
Oh, look, we think whether we're talking about players' name, image, likeness, and video games, or whether we're talking about the structure of the game and scheduling, that firstly the players have rights, and they've got legal rights, which belong to them, irrespective of anything else and any media positioning or anything that anyone may put out there. So that's point one. And secondly, we just think it's, as I said before, it's really important for any high functioning sport to engage with its players, and to do that on a collective basis, because ultimately the players are out there in the arena. They're the ones that the fans will come and see and will pay money to see, and they should be treated as assets. They choose us to represent them in global forums, and that's a very strategic and deliberate decision by the players to do that, to make sure that they're represented professionally. So we think it's important that the game respects that and respects their right and their ability to do that. So look, there's never anything particularly linear in these discussions, but we think it's it's a really important thing for cricket to actually move with the times and make sure it's engaging properly with the players and the people who represent them.
All right, thank you. One more round from me before we get the other panelists involved here. I've seen reports mention the DT20 solidarity payment. Can you tell us what this payment is, who pays it, and what is the reason for this payment?
Sorry, you're talking about our report?
Your report, yes.
Yeah. So when we looked at the numbers in the sport, and that significant imbalance in where revenue sits, we looked at some different levers that the game could potentially use to start to even that up a little bit. And one of those levers or potential levers would be domestic leagues actually sharing some of their revenue also. In terms of, we know a lot of the value that's generated by domestic leagues is built on not just their own domestic players, but by overseas players coming into their environments also. So some kind of mechanism that acknowledges that and acknowledges that everyone's a cog in a wheel in a bigger global system that relies on everyone else for their own success, we think could be a potential lever that the game could look at. Now, the game has done similar things previously whereby when overseas players are picked up and play in domestic leagues, there will often be, or there has been a fee that's gone back to their home national governing body. So look, it's not a completely foreign concept, but ours, the idea that we put into the report just built on that a little bit and probably made it a little bit more robust in terms of that being something that's not necessarily linked to the price that players go for in an auction, but some different ways with which you could do that relating to media rights and other values within those leagues.
Thank you very much. Now we'll ask Leon, the founder president of the Cricket Show USA, if he has any questions for you.
Tom, welcome to our show. It's a platform that you are free to be on every week. We are on in our 16th year presently, and we really, really and truly welcome you. Now, what make you retire from first class cricket so early? Is there a story behind it?
Look, good question. My career was very short and sharp, as was pointed out at the outset of the show. Look, I was only contracted for 2 years here in South Australia. I played a handful of games, of first class games. I lost my contract and came out the other side of that at the same time as I was finishing my studies and my degrees at university, and ended up in a job separate to cricket, in effect practicing as a lawyer. So look, the two things kind of coincided at once, and I had a bit of a decision to make. But I was really fortunate, to have that, I guess, that second career burning alongside, and I was able to transition into that. So look, in short, it wasn't necessarily by choice to start with, because I lost my contract, because I didn't, if you look at my stats, I didn't do very well in first class cricket. But look, I then had a decision to make, and ultimately chose to take a separate path from the playing path, and I've landed back in the sport, which I'm really grateful to have done, and to be able to help the players and hopefully the sport into the future. I'm incredibly lucky to have the role that I do at the moment.
I am a fan of Test cricket. Do you see Test cricket dying? And have your organization made any recommendation to improve the sport? And if you were the president, what measures would you put in place to, say, bring India and Pakistan playing together, playing in Afghanistan, and in short, popularize the Test cricket more?
So a lot of the findings in our report go to that, because we know that Test cricket is still valued in a number of parts of the world. We know that the players, especially on the men's side and on the women's side to an extent, there is still a value placed on Test cricket. The reality of the environment at the moment is that players and others are gravitating towards where they can, where they're valued and where they can optimize their earnings in a very short career path. So we certainly don't begrudge them that, but we want to see a system in which Test cricket can continue to thrive into the future. I think it is at risk, very clearly. I think some of the things I pointed out before, with if you look at where money is coming into the game, in most countries, Test cricket is loss making and it doesn't actually generate revenue. We know that a lot of decisions in our sport are made based on the money, so that's important for that reason. So we think the recommendations in our report talk about protecting international cricket, including Test cricket, in the calendar, and setting aside some really clear windows for Test cricket to be played in each part of the year. We also looked at how you could set up the World Test Championship. Has obviously been a step in the right direction to start to put some more context and some meaning around more Test cricket. And our report goes a step further and suggests that there would be a way to do that, in a bit more of a holistic way, where everyone is playing everyone, in their division in a minimum amount of games as well. So I think the noises out of the last ICC meeting is that they may be looking to move in that direction, and implement some minimum requirements in terms of playing Test cricket as part of that Test Championship against all the other teams in the competition. But look, ultimately, we really want to see it protected into the future, and that's why we think setting up the calendar properly in a way that can protect Test cricket and setting up those competition structures in a way that gives it a little bit more meaning is a really important way to be able to address the issue.
How would you bring Pakistan and India playing together? And of course, Afghanistan playing more games?
I think, look, ultimately, we know that those games, particularly India, Pakistan, are some of the most lucrative sporting events on the planet, to be honest, not just within cricket, but beyond it. And I think there's a lot of people in our sport who would love to see those two countries play more against each other outside of ICC events. Ultimately, I think, and even if you spoke to the governing bodies on this, I think a lot of this goes beyond even cricket politics. I think we're in actual political realms there, and I think to resolve that issue, it's I'd like to think in time that there's an ability for those two countries to be able to play more against each other, but I don't think that's something that certainly not our organisation and even plenty of the decision makers in our sport. I think it's there's things that actually go beyond cricket politics there that are going to need to be addressed in time to enable that.
Thank you very much. Just make way for some other panelists.
Yeah. Now, Professor SosoBone may have some questions for you.
Yes, Dr. Moffat.
Not yet. Hopefully one
well,
day.
I know you're a lawyer by profession. Now, you have served in various countries over the last 10 years, from Ireland to Australia, in different executive capacities. And my question now is this, that due to the inconsistency that we see in some of our cricketers, is drug testing a part of the process, and is that established in the industry?
In short, it is. So cricket comes under the WADA system. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with the WADA system, but the World Anti-Doping Agency, we and our rules in our sport in effect fall in line with those regulations. So that means there is a pretty consistent approach to drug testing and the way anti-doping is handled within the sport. That's rolled out, and the actual testing and the way that's managed is completed by the governing bodies. So whether that's the ICC or the national governing bodies as well. So there is a relatively uniform approach to it. I wouldn't say that system's perfect. Whether you're a governing body or an athlete, there are some issues within that system, but clearly it's important that our sport has integrity from all aspects. So we're supportive of having an anti-doping system, and we'd just like to see that continue to improve into the future.
Okay. My next question has to do with the gambling and the corrupt issue that has raised its head at this time, and what steps now are being put in place or being considered, and how was this really implemented in as much as it has made the headlines now, and what effect it has on the image of cricket?
Great question. Look, we've always advocated for a system in which there needs to be robust anti-corruption systems for our sport. I think historically we've seen some issues in the sport, and some really significant issues in the sport that are clearly not a good look for the whole sport. And we always want cricket to be seen as a clean and a well-managed sport. So the current system, it's moved to a bit more of a uniform system in recent years as well, and the ICC anti-corruption unit have done a good job of ensuring that the regulations around the world that govern anti-corruption and the approach to it have become a little bit more uniform and streamlined across countries. Because we've obviously got a lot of countries, and having everyone doing a completely different thing doesn't make a huge amount of sense. And if you're a player, you want to know the rules and make sure that you've got a really clear understanding of what you can and can't do, and what you need to report to the authorities and things like that. So we think that the players are actually a really key part of the fight against corruption, and educating them and making sure that their education on the ways that they might be approached, or the ways that people might try and infiltrate and corrupt the game. We think the players can actually be foot soldiers in the fight against that, and educating them really needs to be at the heart of the efforts against corruption in the sport. So look, we know that there have been issues historically, and we will continue to try and work with the ICC and with other governing bodies around the world to make sure that the players are actually actively part of the fight against corruption as well.
Okay. Now, my third question is, cricket is coming back to the Olympics after a 100-year absence. And whether it be fortunately or unfortunately, it is being not done in a country where has a long track record of playing cricket, like Australia or Pakistan, but it is being done in the United States. And there have been quite a few discussions, public discussions, as to the type of investment that is being made with the 2-year time period that we have coming up in the grassroots. Okay, not only with players, but with marketing and publicizing that cricket is not something that is brand new to this demographic that it will be, that is a major fans or will for the Olympics is 2028, the United States. What are the recommendations made, therefore, to make sure that the water is well chummed up, so that the type of crowds that you would be getting in an Australia and in England or in India, if the Olympics was staying there and cricket was being played, what recommendations are being made and implemented to ensure that we have that type of response in the United States?
So the Olympics is a really interesting one, because obviously there's it's a positive in lots of ways that that cricket's coming back to the Olympics, and I think if for the Olympic movement, the addition of cricket will be fantastic for the Olympic movement, because we're in effect bringing them a lot of eyeballs and commercial revenue from India in particular into the Olympic movement and to the IOC. So I think that's point one that needs to be made. And then point two, which I think goes to your question, which is how is cricket benefiting and how can it most set the scene to make sure cricket is benefiting from its involvement as well. And I think from our perspective, there are a number of questions on that, and how and on how the sport is actually going to benefit from it, because I know that there's a view that it will unlock some new revenue through national Olympic committees, and there'll be an ability to unlock a little bit of funding through the individual countries' Olympic committees. But we think cricket's bringing a significant amount to the Olympic movement, and that there's just a lot of unknowns about how that actually hangs together, and what value we're actually unlocking for the sport as well. So, and look, the only other point I would make is that calendar space is very scarce for us in our sport, especially on the men's side, as we've talked about. So if we're giving up a couple of weeks of our calendar, prime time of our calendar, I think it'll be in July in LA. It's really important that the sport, the fans and the players understand exactly what that looks like and what that how that all hangs together. So, look, I think there's a few questions still, but to your point, I think there's clearly some positives associated with being back within it as well.
Okay, my last question, in regards to your reference to other sports, because we know that Walter Palmer, it did speak about the fact that cricket need to evolve, okay, and that it has an outdated model. So in regards to your reference and comparison to FIFA, and we on this program consistently draw reference comparison to NBA basketball and soccer, football, baseball, along those lines. They have a reversal system that brings about parity. And while we understand that India, with their 1.5 billion population, brings a lot of eyeballs when within the context, and Pakistan and Australia along those lines, but in order for us to elevate, they have a system where when they're doing their draft, the worst teams get a chance to select first best players, and this in turn rolls the dice Okay, you got what I mean, right? So is this something that cricket might want to consider when they're talking about the draft? So that the teams that needs the help and needs the talent to elevate themselves get first pick, not strictly on the basis of who has the most money, but who has the most need.
It's a great point, and we did look at those dynamics, and you mentioned Walter's article, which thought was a great article that looked at some of the issues we've talked about here as well. I think the issue, I think you're really talking about competitive balance and how do we, as a sport, ensure that in international competition in particular, we've got a competitive product and we've got competitive balance between more countries than just a few.
Yes.
I think over the last 10 or 15 years, almost all of the ICC events and World Cups have been won by India, England, or Australia. So our report talks to the need for competitive balance as well. The issue we've got in international sport is that having a draft or a system like what you see in the NBA or in some of those American sports, it's almost impossible to do that in international sport because the nature of the beast is that you need to be from the country that you're competing for or you're playing for. So that's why we looked at the money so much, because as much as it's not all about money, it is really in international sport. It's one of the only levers available to enable people to develop talent and to invest in talent and to invest in high performance systems in their own country. So ensuring that's shared in a way that can enable that in more than just a handful of countries, we think is really important. So I think, look, the competitive balance angle is a really good one, and we think it's a critical, if we're going to have international cricket surviving and thriving into the future, we've got to solve that problem, because I know you guys all on this call, you love international cricket and you love Test cricket, and there are a lot of people that do. But if we're going to attract a new generation of fans and others to the sport, we're going to keep having broadcasters pay for a product. It needs to be competitive, and we've got to have a depth of competitiveness around the world, and not just a couple of really strong countries and everyone else can't keep up. So look, it's not a simple problem to solve, but it is one of the issues with international sport, is that we're the draft type system that you mentioned is not really available to it as an international sport.